Hello, everybody. Thanks again for tuning in this week. Congress gets back to work this week after a week back in their home states and districts. I hope you got a chance to see your member of Congress in the town hall or some other venue. I know we did back in Minnesota. There's a few things this week that you'll hear about in mainstream media. I'll talk about a couple of those, and then I'll talk about a few items that are coming up that are not going to make the news. Certainly, first and foremost, the House is going to vote on a resolution this week. It's House Joint Resolution 46. That resolution is intended to terminate the President's national emergency. So we'll see what happens. Certainly expect it to pass in the House, likely to pass in the Senate, and President Trump is likely to veto. So we'll see what happens. That's going to be probably the dominant news story. Although that could be overshadowed by a House hearing of the Oversight and Reform Committee with Michael Cohen and his testimony. Certainly that's going to make the sensational news this week. But one other bill that I wanted to highlight that may make the news, likely to pass in the House, is H.R. 8. H.R. 8 is intended to require background checks for all firearm sales. So the Democrats are starting to push legislation to try to address in some fashion the gun violence that is certainly tragically sweeping the nation. Some other things that will not make the news this week in Congress. There are 8 other bills that will come up for a vote in the House this week. There's a couple of bills on health care that will be interesting, likely to pass. One education bill, one natural resources bill, and also a bill dealing with veterans. One of those bills that I wanted to highlight was H.R. 525. That bill is intended to reinforce the current task force on dealing with healthcare fraud. And certainly with the cost of healthcare, that's something that we've been trying to address. And there's a task force working on that, and they're going to add funding and strengthen the healthcare fraud task force. There are a couple of hearings that I wanted to highlight that will probably not make the news because it will be again overshadowed by the Michael Cohen hearing. Thursday in the Senate, there is a hearing in the morning on the opioid epidemic and dealing with ways to prevent and treat opioid addiction in the country. Certainly a lot of work to be done there, and this is one way to start that process. And also in the House, there is a hearing that is intended to address the integrity of the U.S. election system. And I'm not exactly sure, the witness list had not been posted when I looked this morning, but certainly if you go to congress.gov, click on the committees and hearing schedule, you'll find those hearings, and they will update them very close to the hearing time in terms of the witness list. Those are the kind of the key things that are happening in Congress. One thing I noticed, there's a number of other House hearings, and again, if you go to that link, there's quite a few hearings next week dealing with a lot of the oversight that the Democrats have been talking about doing relative to this administration. And they're beginning to do that, doing both legislating and oversight, which is something that they had pledged to do. So it'll be interesting to watch this week. I hope that if you get a chance to see this and some of these items pique your curiosity or your interest, that you can contact your member of Congress on your position and exercise your voice. Thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you next week.